about I tell you a little more about my life? As I said, I'm from the United States of America. I was born in Pittsburgh, and my family moved to Philadelphia when I was a little girl. We seemed to move around quite a bit as my dad made a good income, and he was a man of leisure, so he didn't mind moving. When I was 14, I enrolled at the Pennsylvania Academy for Fine Arts. The unusual part about this is at that point in time, which was 1860, women, young women particularly, were not admitted to any sort of school where you were taught the arts. Women in general, 10 years prior to that and 10 years prior to that, weren't even admitted to college, aside from a few, such as Oberlin College and University of Michigan and Vassar. But anyway, I was determined that I would attend this school and learn how to paint and draw properly. It was not to be. You see, the instructors at the Pennsylvania Academy for Fine Arts seemed to pay a lot of attention to the young boys in the class and gave them all kinds of pointers. But myself and the young women, well, we were sort of on our own. I graduated in May of 1865 from the Academy, and at that point I told my father that I had planned after graduation to move to Paris and become a fine artist. My father was not happy. He said to me, "I love you, my beautiful daughter. You are so sweet, but you are so stupid. And if you continue to go along this path and decide that you're going to be a fine artist, I would rather see you dead." Artists are nothing but bohemians with a lack of morals, and they seem to have all these odd ideas. Well, Mother and I sailed for Paris in the fall of 1865 and set up housekeeping in a lovely apartment in the American section of Paris. For the next 4 years, I would attend various classes at various academies in Paris, and every single day I would go to the Louvre and set up a stool and an easel and a canvas and sometimes my drawing tablet, and I would copy the masters. Now, this was normal for young students back during those times. You would copy the masters to help your ability improve. I did this for 4 years and eventually developed my own style. In 1870, Paris was invaded again. It had been invaded many times prior to that, but this time it was the Prussians. So Mother and I sailed back to Philadelphia, and I didn't want to let my art fall by the wayside, so I set up a studio in my bedroom. And for the next 8 months or so, I painted and I drew every single day. You see, I wanted to gather together a number of appropriate and sterling paintings to take to some galleries in Chicago. Chicago had a number of galleries and a number of wonderful art museums. So I got on the train and I arrived in Chicago, checked into a decent hotel, settled in, put my art in the closet, went to dinner that evening. And as I was sipping my coffee after my fine meal, one of the waiters raced over to me. I noticed there was a hubbub going on within the restaurant. The waiter said to me, "Madam, you must leave the restaurant and find a safe place to go." I said, "But why?" He said, "Because there's a fire raging outside." This fire became known as the Great Chicago Fire. And my work literally went up in smoke. So, got on the train again, traveled back to Philadelphia, and started painting again for the next year. This was in 1871. during that time period, I needed some socialization, and so I met a young woman by the name of Emily Sartain. She and her sister Lucine were from a very high-class society family. And as time marched on, they would help me down the road. I told Emily that I was going to attempt one more time to settle in Paris, and she agreed to sail over to France with me. We had a little tiny apartment in the bohemian section of Paris, which Father would not have been happy about. I noticed while I had been gone that there was a new group of painters with a new style. They called themselves, I wrote this down in my diary, they called themselves the Anonymous Society of Painters, Sculptors, and Engravers. And their style was quite different. You see, prior to 1870, if one was able and one had the income to buy fine art, the paintings that you bought would have been very fine brushstrokes with darker colors, gold-gilded frames, very, very serious. But the Impressionist painters, and they were labeled that by the critics, the Impressionist painters used pastel colors, they used broad brushstrokes, and the subject that they were painting was their first impression of that subject, thus the name, the Impressionists. Now, it was made up of about 8 artists: Marceau, Monet, Pissarro, Gauguin, Cézanne, Renoir, and the leader of the group was Edgar Degas. Edgar Degas was most famous for painting very young ballet dancers, and sometimes he would do pastel drawings of them also, which were lovely. Also, he liked to go to the racetrack and paint the jockeys and the horses. Now, I was able to converse with all of them because I spoke fluent French. Our family had lived in France for a while, so I was able to do that. Degas had an odd personality. He hardly knew me, but he could be very sarcastic. And he criticized my American accent when I spoke French. I found that so irritating because he had been raised until he was 14 years old in New Orleans, Louisiana, and never bothered to learn English. Well, at least Degas had admired my work when he saw it in a gallery show. And he invited me in 1874 to be part of the group. Now, as I said, I was able to communicate with them, and this made things so much easier for me. I was so honored to be part of the group.